everyone, and welcome to Money Matters with Shannon Jackson. On today's show, we're focusing on the growing concerns regarding U.S. tariffs. What will they mean for our economy on a national, provincial, and local level? And what will they mean for you as a consumer? And amid this ongoing economic uncertainty, how can you protect your financial well-being? We're going to have some great advice coming up for you. First, we're going to focus on the tariff concerns and the economic impact. And joining me now to talk about that is David-Aexandre Brassard, CPA Canada's chief economist. David, thank you for being here today.
Thank you for inviting me.
Before we get into our major discussion, can you just share a little bit about yourself and CPA Canada?
Sure. So as the chief economist for CPA Canada, I support our organization and our members with content and advocacy. And my organization, CPA Canada, represents accountants across the country. And as such, we have a significant presence in the business landscape.
Well, you're definitely the expert to be talking to today, because we've certainly heard there's lots of talks about tariffs, and there's no doubt that Canadians are worried. Since President Trump took office in January, we faced the threat of the increased tariffs, and these were initially to take effect in February and then have been postponed, of course, but now they have effectively taken effect. So, David, just from a high-level perspective, what exactly has been implemented with these tariffs?
So as you said, the United States has gone through on its threat. So we have tariffs starting on March 4th. That are essentially 25% on all Canadian goods and Mexican goods. There's a reduction of 10% on Canadian energy product, mainly for oil and gas and electricity. The U.S. has also upped the Chinese tariffs to 20%. And Canada has announced a retaliation plan before the threat was postponed in February, and they seem to be going through with it. It includes 25% tariffs on $30 billion worth of U.S. good, and there's an additional $125 billion worth that should be, they said 21 days, so 3 weeks. Mexico has yet to announce its retaliation plan. Meanwhile, China upped tariff to 10-15% on certain American goods. So as you alluded to in your question, we've now moved from the uncertainty of January and February to a full-fledged trade war with the U.S. It's still in the plans. The U.S. mentioned that they wanted to put 25% tariffs on all sources of aluminum and steel in April. So that's what we're looking at, Shannon.
So economists have been pretty clear that the tariffs are definitely going to have an impact, and it's likely to send us into a recession. Now, they predict as well for some industries, the impact will be possibly fairly immediate with job losses and layoffs. I want to just start from a national perspective. What kind of an impact will the tariffs have on our national economy?
So as you said, it will be substantial. Let's remind our audience that our international trade very heavily concentrated in the U.S. Over 70% of our exports go down there, and over 60% of our imports come from the U.S. You alluded to a recession. In numbers, most numbers that I've seen hover around the 2 percentage point hit to GDP. Keep in mind, our potential growth is around 1.6, 1.7. So you see there, it brings us to negative territory. Regarding the job loss, I've seen the number 500,000 jobs being thrown around. The unemployment rate currently stands at 6.6, and most of the estimates I've seen see us going up to 8% or 9%. And you mentioned industries. The more integrated your industry is, the car industry is a good one. The more you will be hit, the more production will be hindered. The only silver lining is that we are entering this trade tension from a slightly better position than we expected. GDP growth was strong in Q4. Employment was getting bigger. But make no mistake, we will be erasing those gains with a prolonged trade war with the U.S.
Well, and you mentioned just before that the U.S. is our biggest trade partner, nationally and provincially. Industry and business here at home in Ontario are definitely going to feel an impact. And understandably, people here in Ontario are worried. There was a Nanos poll released just last week that said that 9 out of 10 Ontarians admit that they are concerned about the tariffs having that negative impact on our province. So, David, what can we expect here in Ontario in the provincial level in relation to what might happen on the national level?
Sure. This is the point where I'm not positive. I wish I was. I mentioned the integration with the US. Ontario is very integrated with the United States. Your share of imports and exports coming from the US and going there is even higher than the rest of the country. And the province is particularly trade-centric. What I mean by that is trade accounts for a significant portion of your GDP. So it means you stand to lose more. I mentioned the car industry. That industry is very strong in Ontario. So the back and forth of that industry is going to hurt if you've got tariff on one side and tariff on the other. Ontario has a slightly negative trade balance with the US, which is different from the rest of the country. It means that retaliation will spread the pain a little bit more in Ontario, but your premier seems to be aware of that and seems to be aware of the importance of fighting back because of the impact that it could have. The statement that I said around the Canadian economy entering trade tension from a slightly stronger economic position, it's not entirely true for Ontario. You have a consumer base that is highly indebted, even more than the rest of the country. And the cycle of rate hikes coupled with a slightly higher immigration left your province with an unemployment that raised slightly more than in the rest of the country. So as I said, I'm a bit negative because a trade war will pile on economic pain, which lowering interest rates would not be sufficient to reduce.
So there was a recent report in the Financial Post that says, quote, tariffs will mean an economic earthquake for our country, nationally, provincially, and locally. That tariffs will obliterate jobs, cripple industries, and leave millions feeling even more financial strain. Now, this is obviously a very difficult statement to hear. And I want to point out that many consumers and businesses are already struggling to keep up since the following year or the previous years of inflation and higher interest rates. Can you share a little bit about your thoughts from the small business and consumer perspective?
Sure. From the business perspective, as you alluded to, cash flow was challenging during the pandemic. That's an easy way to say it. A lot of the help that we had during the pandemic was loan-based. Those loans have to be paid back. That's where we were in 2023, 2024, and now again another hit on the cash flow front. So we could be looking at quite a bit of pain that we would need to alleviate through support, which we might talk about a bit later on. From the consumer perspective, we've had 2 years of very strong population growth. Essentially, our consumer base expanded by over 2 million people since mid 2022. So it's a strong push. This is why the economy reacted relatively well to having very high interest rates when you've got a highly indebted consumer base. It's basically because you've got more people. That will no longer be the case. Immigration has flipped on its head, and if the federal government lands where it wants to land, we will not have more consumers. We might have less in 2025, 2026, and consumption per capita has been dropping in those times. So I don't expect the consumer to be able to drive forward the economy as much in 2025 and in 2026. And again, the issue with tariff, as you know, Shannon, is that they increase also price. So there's an inflation risk there. So it's a double whammy for the businesses. If your consumer base is not growing, your per capita is struggling, and the things are more expensive, it's going to hit hard, as you said.
Now, I think it's worth pointing out that even before the tariffs were implemented, people were, it seemed, already trying to be proactive. So there was a recent survey from the Canadian Federation of Independent Business that said that investment in the country has already been impacted. Nearly 1 in 5 small or medium-sized businesses are experiencing canceled or paused orders due to the tariff situation. Survey also showed that more than half of small businesses say that they don't feel prepared for the impacts of the tariffs. And they're also saying that businesses are looking to delay their expansion plans, reduce their workforce. They're looking for new suppliers to address the tariffs. So it seems, David, that with the threats that have been happening over the last few months, small, medium-sized businesses have been trying to be proactive in a reaction to that. Is that true?
It is. It is. We've also seen it south of the border as well. There's been an uptick in imports from U.S. businesses who imported more, knowing that the tariffs were coming. So there's indeed a proactive way to work at it. There's some stuff that we're trying to do regarding interprovincial trade barriers, where we're trying to reduce them in order, but there's only so much that we can do in the very short term, because if you want to export elsewhere than in the U.S., you need transport facilities, and essentially it's port capacities that you do need, and you need access to that port. So basically, the best way for a business to have access to an export market is if you've got a train connecting them to a port. That's the only way that you can make it competitive, because there's a significant transport component if you want to ship things to Europe. And the focus has to be on high value added goods. As I said, it's very costly. So if we want to be competitive, that's the way we go. So there's a proactive element, but keep in mind, there's only so much we can do in the short term. There's more we can do in the mid to long term. But again, we have to collaborate and be united into that front, because there's been in the past a not in my backyard mentality when it comes to building infrastructure. You need to build your port capacity either on the East Coast or on the West Coast. You can't build it in the middle of Canada. So there has to be unity on that front.
Now, we only have a minute or so left, but just quickly, do you think that there's any aid or any kind of assistance that the federal government could step in with?
Yes, I think we're very fast. We're going to make sure that employment insurance has the resources that it needs, because we'll need fast and accurate treatments of claim to have fast subsequent payment. For new offering, I expect a response based on what we saw during the pandemic. Most likely a mix of wage support and loans for businesses. Most likely more loans. We don't have as much fiscal room as we did before the pandemic. But one of the silver lining is that the impacts are more concentrated in certain industries, so we can focus a little bit more our support programs in that case.
Well, David, I really want to thank you for being here today, sharing your expert advice. Thank you so much. And of course, we know tariffs are already having an impact. They're creating a lot of stress and anxiety for Canadians who are already concerned about their finances, and especially for those who may be facing a job loss. So if you're among those people, we have advice on how you can safeguard your financial well-being when Money Matters returns after the break.
This program is brought to you by Rogers Xfinity, connecting you to more of what you love. Visit Rogers.com for more details.
This is a perfectly healthy child. What's unhealthy are birth alerts, a racist practice that may stop this Indigenous mother from going home with her newborn. Become an ally. Rise above racism in healthcare.
You're watching an interesting local show on Rogers TV and you want to know more. That's when you head to RogersTV.com. Our website provides more information about our programs, our hosts, our schedule, and about how you too can get involved with Rogers TV. Visit us online at RogersTV.com.
Welcome back to Money Matters with Shannon Jackson. Today we're talking about tariffs. Before the break, David-Aexandre Brassard, Chief Economist with CPA Canada, shared his thoughts on the impact they will have on our economy. And as you heard, there is reason to be concerned. If you're worried about how you will weather the effect tariffs will have on your financial well-being, my next guest has advice for you. Nathan Sugeng is a partner, senior vice president, and licensed insolvency trustee with BDO Debt Solutions. Nathan, welcome back to the show.
Thanks for having me again.
Before we get into your advice, can you share a little bit about BDO and what you do?
Sure. Well, for those that don't know, BDO is a national accounting firm. So in addition to audit and taxes, we also have a consulting practice that we call advisory. And within that, we do things like consult on tech, AI, mergers and acquisitions. And we also consult on insolvency. And within our practice, we've got two main branches. One is corporate insolvency for businesses and organizations. And then we also have a consumer insolvency practice where we help with individuals. I myself am a licensed insolvency trustee, or LIT for short, and I'm licensed by the federal government to basically help provide debt solutions to consumers and businesses.
Well, I think we're heading into a situation where these tariffs are definitely going to have an impact on consumers, both obviously on our national economy, our local economy, and it seems like the rhetoric is that we're possibly looking into a recession coming up here, and especially here in Ontario. And of course, this is concerning because we know that already families have had prolonged economic uncertainty. It's taken its toll on the household finances. And we know from the country's two credit reporting agencies that many are already on that financial edge. And tariffs, I think, may be that last blow to consumers. And it could be what pushes them over that financial cliff. So, Nathan, for viewers who are worried, how can we be proactive to protect our financial well-being?
So there's a number of different things that, I can walk through today. Some might be intuitive, some not, but it's just a good time to refresh our memories anyway. So the first tenet in budgeting is to try and build a 3 to 6 month war chest or emergency fund. And basically that's to deal with times like this where things get more expensive, income is reduced. It gives you that extra wiggle room, that buffer, if you will, to tap into. So if you do have an emergency fund of 3 to 6 months, that's absolutely something that you would now want to tap into. So this is the time to use that money, basically. If you don't have an emergency fund, or in addition to, I think this is a really good time to review your budget. This is something that you should probably do at least 6 to 12 months anyway. But definitely now that things are expected to change quite drastically, this is a great time. And some of the things you want to look at in reviewing your budget are things like, what are your current savings level? So even if you don't have a 3 to 6 month emergency fund. So when I say 3 to 6 month, that means 3 to 6 months worth of what your monthly income would be. So if my monthly income is $3,000 a month, then, that's 3 times that amount or 6 times that amount. So if you don't have that amount, again, what current savings do you have? Because now you'll at least know what you have to play with. Trying to predict as best as possible. Again, no one has a crystal ball, but looking at what your likely income is going to be. So if you are an hourly worker, or your income can fluctuate based on the amount that you work, trying to figure out what that would look like and base your budget on that. Obviously, when there's a recession and businesses are struggling, the likelihood of bonuses and raises aren't there. So again, you wouldn't want to, add any of those types of things into your budget calculations. And then finally, you want to review all of your monthly payments as well as your debt payments. And, in reviewing that, the next bit on budgeting is how can you reduce your expenses? And, the basic idea behind it is it's not going to be forever, but for this short frame of time, of hopefully what will be a short frame of time, is, you really need to identify what's a need and a want. So obviously a need, you need to pay for your mortgage or your rent. You need to pay for groceries. You need to pay for utilities. Wants would be things that are discretionary, things that you can live without, obviously. So things like going out for coffee, meals, even cable TV subscriptions, things of that nature. There's a lot of other sources of free entertainment or cheaper entertainment. So even if you don't, cancel the subscription, maybe go to a package that's a lower cost. We're in the dead of winter, so conserving a little bit of heat and hydro. So I'm not suggesting that you turn things off, but shutting off the lights. Electricity has been expensive for a number of years, but turning off the lights when you're in an area that you're not using, lowering your your heat by a couple of degrees, putting on a sweater, extra blankets, that sort of thing. When you're shopping for groceries, make a list, stick to the list, take advantage of coupons. And then the last thing I would say is that especially in this internet stage, there's a lot of different ways to what's termed a side hustle. So creating a secondary source of income or getting a part-time job, I think appears to be a lot easier today, just based on the World Wide Web that we have. But again, I want to stress to everybody, these are temporary measures. They're not intended to be forever. So the tenet of short-term pain for long-term gain is something to keep in mind when you're making these choices.
I agree with you as well that small changes in our behavior can have a bigger result. Like you say, looking for those deals at the grocery store, being a little bit more frugal on your utility usage and things like that. Those are just small things to do, but they're easy to do and can have that benefit, which is really good advice. Now, of course, Nathan, when somebody has gone through this exercise and they've done everything that they can with their budget, it may mean that numbers are still not going to work. And so do you have any advice for those who are in a position where they've done everything they can, but they're still in that tight financial position?
Absolutely. So when we look at other avenues, and I don't want to say more drastic avenues, but maybe more aggressive avenues. One would be, if for homeowners out there with equity in their homes, is to tap into that. And I don't like suggesting using debt to solve problems. But again, when we're looking at a short-term window, the equity is a tool that you have. And when you look at tapping into equity, it's one of the cheaper ways to access money, meaning that the interest rates associated with a home equity line of credit or refinancing your mortgage, those rates tend to be the lowest. So if you are going to borrow, that would be probably the cheapest way to do it. Along that line, if you are going to tap into credit to make ends meet, and when I say make ends meet, so this is to bridge the gap in your budget. So if you don't have that emergency fund and your income's $3,000, your expenses are, let's say, $3,500, how do you bridge that $500 gap? That's what I'm talking about using credit for. Other avenues or access to credit would be things like lines of credit and credit cards. And the reason why I'm pointing those two things out, they act similar, but the main difference is the interest rate associated with them. So typically credit card interest rates are in the 20+% range, whereas credit lines that are unsecured, meaning they're not attached to your house mortgage or anything like that, are still maybe 10% or less. So half the cost easily of what a credit card is. So if you're going to tap into credit, don't use the credit cards, use a line of credit if you have it. And then the last one I would suggest would be communicate early and often with your bank, your lender. There are different avenues that they may be able to offer you, things like negotiating lower payments. So again, if you're looking at your house, there are ways in which you can lower your monthly mortgage payment within the rules of the existing mortgage. There are also things such as being able to skip payments or delay payments that are built into the features of your mortgage. Called consolidation loans is something that you can also utilize. So the idea behind a consolidation loan is you can take some higher interest rate debt, combine it into one monthly payment at a lower interest, and overall your monthly debt cost is lower. And again, communication is key. Talk to the banks. There might be other options that they have that they can offer you.
And for those people who need that professional advice and they want to reach out to someone like yourself as a licensed insolvency trustee, what kind of options would you talk to somebody about?
So first of all, I think, you bring up a really good point, because a lot of times people look at us as the last resort. And I think that's a little bit misleading, because sometimes I think we might be the best people to talk to first. When we do talk to people and offer them a free consultation, it's a free consultation, it's confidential, so nobody knows. We can do it in person or virtual. So again, if you're worried about people finding out, no one's going to know other than you. The sooner that we can talk to you, generally the more options you have. So again, instead of talking to us last, talking to us first, again, we can roll out all these options. And part of our regulations are not just to talk about insolvency type of options, but all of your options. And that's part of our mandate. That's part of our licensing structure. And then finally, you're the driver, so whatever we offer, suggest, you're the final decision maker. So, I guess what you would typically get in a conversation with us is we do a financial checkup, basically. So if you think about when you are sick, you go to your doctor, they ask you some questions, do some tests. We are, as a professional, we're similar. We'll ask you some questions. We'll look at where you are, and then we'll come up with solutions, walk you through how they work, the pros, the cons. Basically what I like telling people when I see them is that I'm going to read you all the fine print before you sign anything.
So you mentioned that your mandate is we go through all the options. And now, of course, insolvency options that a licensed insolvency trustee can help with is a bankruptcy or a consumer proposal. What kind of benefits would those options have for somebody in that situation?
So generally, both accomplish the same thing in that your debt is going to be reduced. That's the first and foremost. So whatever the amount is, fundamentally, it's going to reduce your debt. The difference between the two is how we reduce the debt. So in a bankruptcy, it's a system where you're essentially doing two things. You're trading certain assets or giving up certain assets to trade off not having to pay those debts. And then there's also some rules regarding payments based on your income. So those are the two big moving parts with the bankruptcy. In a consumer proposal, it's basically a debt settlement. So in that type of scenario, we're negotiating repayment terms with your creditors as a group. So again, the debt's still going to be reduced, but instead of having to give up certain assets, having your income reviewed on a regular basis and having to make a payment based on your level of income, you have a little bit more power, if you will, to dictate the terms of what that monthly payment will look like. And as a licensed insolvency trustee, we administer both. Administer basically means we sort of act as the referee or the guide as you go through that journey.
So we only have a minute left. Do you have any final thoughts for our viewers as we head into this sort of uncertain time with these tariffs?
Yeah, so it is a very scary time. It's going to bring up a lot of stress and anxiety. And I know that when people hear the words insolvency and bankruptcy, that adds to that stress and that anxiety. But what I want to share with people is something that's not widely known. Most people, when they come and see us, don't actually do anything on the spot. So number one, you're not doing anything on the spot. But I want to say a very high percentage, almost 90%. Most people just having a talk with us feel so relieved just knowing that there are options. There is a way to help. There is a way to fix. So I would say, don't be scared. Reach out sooner rather than later. It's not as bad as you think.
And how can people reach out to you?
So a lot of our contact information, I think, is going to be posted up, but BDOdebt.ca is our website. All of our contact information is there, including phone numbers if you want to talk to somebody. There's a self-booking tool if you just want to book an appointment. Gives a free consultation that's confidential with no commitment.
Well, Nathan, thank you again for being here. Really appreciate all your great advice. And I also want to thank you, our viewers, for watching. Until next time, I'm Shannon Jackson.